We're here today to walk through the process of setting up a GeoGraphix Discovery project server. So the main reason for setting up a project server is that it provides a central location for all your project-related data and allows for multiple users to be active in the same project at the same time. So instead of users working with individual projects on their workstations and not be able to see each other's work and synchronize data, everybody can be in the same projects and see each other's work in real time. So today's agenda, what we'll go through is we'll talk about first the server requirements. Then we'll talk about what the project server is actually doing, the three GGX services that will be running on it. Then we'll go through the actual setup and configuration of a project server. And once we're done with that, we'll do a configuration of the workstation and make sure that we can actually see that server and then activate a project on it. All right, so we'll start with recommended hardware. The recommended hardware specifications for a GeoGraphix project server can always be found in the Discovery release notes. Always refer to the release notes for the version that you are installing, as they can change slightly between versions, different hardware, different operating systems supported, that kind of thing. So always check the release notes for the version that you're doing. And we get asked this a lot, but the exact specifications for a server can vary depending on various factors such as the size of the projects, size of database files, type of data that's being worked with, and other such factors. So before implementing a project server, if you want, you can give us a call. We can talk to you about your environment, how many users you have and stuff, and kind of help come up with more specific specifications. But in general, we typically recommend a server with multiple 2 to 4 processors, probably 16 or more gigs of RAM, and fast local hard drives if the projects are going to be located locally on the server, or a network attached storage device. At this time, the Discovery software has only been tested with Server 2008 R2 64-bit for a server operating system. And many of our clients are using virtual servers instead of just physical servers, so there's no real issues that I've seen, just as long as adequate resources are still provided to that virtual server. So basically, the same requirements exist whether it's a physical or a virtual server. All right, so basically, what's the project server doing? Well, there isn't a separate version, like a separate server version versus a client version of the Discovery software. So a Discovery project server is essentially just a PC that has the Discovery software installed on it and then designated as a project server. But when the Discovery software is installed, there are 3 Windows services that are created. There's the GGX database service, the GGX list service, and the GGX network access service. And these 3 services running on a PC are essentially all it takes for that PC to act as a project server. So the first one, the database service, is basically the Sybase database engine. So it's going to handle all I/O, import, exports, queries, that kind of stuff, for the project database files on that server. And so this is probably the majority of what the project server will be handling, in addition to just the general, the file sharing, the serving of the files for the projects. The second service is the GGX list service. This basically handles all communication between the Discovery software installed on all the PCs in your network. So it monitors the file system of the project home. So for the project server, it's going to be watching everything that's going on in that project home, and then whenever any user makes a change, broadcast that change to the other PCs, to the user workstation. So when one user creates a new map or layer, it's instantly notified all the other workstations that new project element is there. And the last one is the GGX network access service. This simply manages user access to map layers. So it tracks which layers are loaded in GeoAtlas and only allows one user at a time to edit a particular layer. So as I said, these 3 services running on a PC are essentially all it takes for that PC to act as a project server. And all the configuration procedures that we're about to perform are basically related back to these 3 services. So the basic project server setup workflow, obviously you're going to install the Discovery software. Then once that's done, perform the decon configuration procedures. We're going to add exceptions to any firewall or security software that might be running. And then there's some configuration required of the actual discovery software itself. And then when we're kind of done all that, then obviously you go over to the workstation side, and then there's potentially some system options that need to change in the workstation. And then if you have any exceptions that need for any firewall software that's running in the workstations, you might need to add some exceptions there as well. So that's basically what we're going to go through today. Now, as I said earlier, there isn't a server versus client version of the software. So the procedures for installing the software on a server are exactly the same as when installing on a workstation. So we're not going to go through the actual installation of the software, since there's nothing really to learn from there. There's nothing different. So instead, we're just going to jump straight to the additional configuration that's done after the software is installed. So for this demonstration, the software has already been installed using just the basic typical installation options. So what we'll do is I'll flip over to a machine that I'm using as a project server. So this is just through a remote desktop session. And you can see the discovery icons are already on the left side, so the software is already installed. So after the software is installed, the first thing we typically do is decon configuration. So the decon configuration procedures essentially allow the discovery software on the user workstations to communicate with the discovery software on the server and access the project-related files. Now, the procedures that we're about to perform are included in a white paper on the support portal. So if you go to the support portal, go to Knowledge Center, go down to white papers, and under the systems, these are all our system-related white papers. And there's configured decon for GeoGraphix Discovery Project Server on Microsoft Windows Server 2008. So that's the white paper for that. So it's got, and I'll bring that up here, it's got detailed instructions with screen captures and step-by-step procedures that you need to go through in order to do this. So what we'll do is we'll go through this now, but don't worry about trying to take notes or anything, because this document is available. And I guess before we get into that, I will mention if these procedures are not done or not done correctly, something is missed as we go through it, what will happen is the users will see the project server in Project Explorer, but not the project home underneath. And these same procedures that we're about to do also need to be performed again after updating the discovery software on the server. So we do the settings now, everything's good. A few months down the road, a new version of Discovery comes out, we update the server. You need to go back over these configuration procedures again, because these settings basically get reset as part of the update process. So what will happen is you'll update the Discovery software, and then the users won't see the project home again. All right, so to modify the decon permissions, we do that through, under Control Panel, Administrative Tools, Component Services. And again, all these steps that I'm about to go through are all in that white paper. So we expand Component Services, expand Computers. First thing we'll do is we'll right-click on the My Computer, do Properties. We'll click on the COM Security tab, and we're going to look at the access and launch and activation permissions. So the first thing we'll do is we'll click on Edit Limits. And here's where we're going to look at the different groups that are set up in here. Now, our document basically has you using the group everyone. It's kind of the simplest group to use because everyone's obviously a part of it. If there is a specific group that you want to use for all your GeoGraphix users, you have a specific group that all your GeoGraphix users are part of, you can certainly use that as instead of just using the group everyone by default. You just have to make sure that you explicitly add the users that need access into that group. So that's why we typically just recommend using everyone. That's why there's no extra configuration required. So for here, we just want to make sure the group everyone exists, and it has allow for local access and remote access. And we want to do the same for launch and activation. Click on Edit Limits, everyone, and basically it just needs these three options: local launch, local activation, remote activation. You can turn the fourth one on, remote launch, if you just want to click them all on and forget about it. That's fine, but it really only needs those three. Once we're done that, we can expand My Computer, expand decom, and we're going to scroll down till we find the Geosync process. So Geosync is a process that's running for the GGX list service that we talked about earlier. So we're going to do properties of that, go to security, and typically what it's set to is default. And what we're going to need to do is choose customize and add in the group that we want to add in. So for this, everyone is here. We want to make sure that those same permissions are checked. Normally what will happen is if it's set to default, we'll need to come in here and manually add those groups. We'll do customize, edit, and then this is where you would either add in the group everyone or the specific group that you want to use. And do the same for access permissions. Oops. Allow. Okay. So once decon permissions are done, we can say OK, and then we can close down the component services window. Oops. And we're done in here. So now the next step would be any firewall exceptions. So if there's any security or firewall software that's running on the server, we're going to need to add in some necessary exceptions into that. It's basically the exceptions for the program files for those three services. If we don't add those in, it's going to be blocking all the necessary communications, and we're not going to see the server at all. So there again is a white paper on the portal that explains how to add firewalls exceptions into the Windows firewall. So if you're using any other firewall software other than the Windows one, the same program files will need to be added as an exception into that software using whatever the procedures are for that one. So we will go through the firewall setup for the Windows firewall. And we're going to allow programmer feature through Windows firewall. And basically what we do is allow another program. Oops, browse. And so the program files that we want to add are all under the program files GeoGraphix directory where the software was installed. And the first one we'll put in is for the database service. So that's under SQL Anywhere 12, bin 64. For this version of the software, if you're running an older version of the software, it might be a different location for the database service. And the executable is dbsrv12.exe. Say open and add. And then we'll do another one. Browse. We'll go back up the directory. So the other two ones are in the tools directory. So there's Geosync again, so that's the list service one. And then add back in the service, the third service, which is the network access, or the network access service. Okay, and so you can see the three services: the Geosync, GGX-NASRV, which is the network access service, and the database service actually gets added in, and it's called the SQL Anywhere Network Server. So we'll say OK to that. So again, if you're using a different firewall software, those are the three program files, but you'll have to use whatever procedures for that software. All right, so at this point, we're done with the external configuration of the server. So now we basically need to start up the software and perform some additional configuration of the Discovery software itself. So in here, basically what we're going to be doing is adjusting the amount of RAM being assigned to the database service for its cache, and then also enabling the concurrent access. So that's all done through the tools menu and then down to system options. So this is basically kind of the only place where you can really modify or change anything to do with the software. So the first thing we'll do is on this first tab, we're going to turn on this middle option. This is turned off by default. We want to enable this. I want to give multiple users concurrent access to a single project. This is what will allow multiple users to activate the same project at the same time. So it's important that you turn that one on. And the next thing we'll do is we'll come over to the database service, and we're going to adjust the amount of RAM assigned to the database servers. So we typically recommend this to be somewhere around 75 to 80% of the total RAM in the server. Now that's based on the server not doing anything else. So it's a server dedicated to being a Discovery project server. Now, if this server is also doing other things, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but sometimes you can't always have multiple servers. If it's doing something else, there's other software on here, other database software, you might have to lower that just to ensure that there's enough memory for whatever other processes are also running on that server. But for a dedicated one, we typically have about 75 to 80%. And the other thing that we often will have clients enable is the database logging for the database service. So this will just, it's a additional logging information that's done by the database service itself. So if any users have any OWC problems or database connectivity issues, it's just another informational log that we can then check, for any sort of issues. So to enable that, you put in some startup parameters here. It's a dash lowercase o, and then basically the path to the file that you want to create. So if you put it into a directory called logs, you need to go make sure you create that directory first, because this will not create that directory for you. But I typically just leave it in the root. So what this will do is, as the database service starts, it'll tell you some information about the amount of memory it's using. It'll kind of keep track of when users activate and deactivate a project, and it'll give you some informational warnings about how fragmented the files are. So there's some useful information in there in general, as well as a useful tool if any database issues are encountered. All right, so once we've made these changes, we'll click on OK to save them. So now it's going to say that changes will take effect next time you restart your computer. Now, if this was a brand new install, I would definitely recommend rebooting the project server at this point to verify that everything comes back up correctly, the services all start, everything looks good. So obviously we're going to skip that for this point, otherwise we'd lose connectivity to you. So what we do need to do is restart the 3 GGX services in order for the changes that we made in system options to take effect. So there's different ways you can stop and restart Windows services. You can go through the services control panel, but one of the easier ways, if you have the Discovery software running, if you go down to the system tray, you find the project manager icon, which is the one that kind of looks like a little globe, right click on it and choose shut down Discovery. Now you have to be careful with this because it closes all the Discovery modules that are open and shuts down the 3 GGX services. So only do that if you know that there's nobody else on the server, that nobody has any active projects on the server. And then once the services are stopped, we will go ahead and just start the software back up, make sure it all comes back up, make sure nothing that we changed is going to prevent it from starting correctly. Just activate a project. And at this point, we're basically done with the configuration of the project server. So we've done the decon permissions, we've added in some firewall exceptions, we've configured the Discovery software, and so at this point we can now move off the project server, go over to a workstation, and make sure that we can actually see this project server and activate a project on it. So I'll minimize the remote desktop session I've got, and so now I'm back on my workstation. So again, the Discovery software is already installed, just using the regular typical installation options. So we'll go ahead and start that. So from the workstation side, there's not typically a lot of extra configuration that's required. Again, if you have any firewall software running on the user workstations, you might need to add in the same exceptions that we did earlier on the project server. But on the workstation side, really the only thing that we typically might need to do is go under Tools, System Options again, and this time we're going to go to the Broadcast tab. And what we're going to do specifically is tell this workstation the host name of the project server to go talk to. So in a smaller environment where all your workstations and servers are all in the same subnet, they kind of automatically all show up and they talk to each other underneath the network section in Project Explorer. In a larger environment, or if you've got your networks separated, your project server is often on a different subnet than the workstation, so they won't automatically see each other. So this is when we have to come in here and specifically tell this workstation the name of the server that we want to connect to. So in my case, it's lmkr-u-73. So we click on Add Name, and you'll see it moves it over here and gives the full qualified domain name. So at this point, we just need to click on OK. Again, any changes that you make in here, it's going to give you this message. You don't necessarily have to reboot, but you do have to restart those 3 services. So we'll do the same thing. We'll go down to Project Manager icon in the System tray, right-click, shut down Discovery. And again, that'll shut down the Discovery software modules that are open and then stop those 3 services. And then once they're stopped, we can start the software back up. Now, you don't have to manually start the services after they're stopped. If you're going to start the software back up again, the software will automatically restart those 3 services for you first, and then start Project Explorer. So that first time, it might take a few seconds longer since it has to start the services, but you don't have to manually go and start them. And we'll just activate a local project. And now what we should see, if we did everything correctly, is underneath the network section here, we should see the name of our project server, which in this case was the lmkr-u-73. So these other workstations that you see are some other machines that are in our environment here, the other workstations. So as you can see, here's the server, here's the project home underneath. So what will happen if you did the decon permissions incorrectly or forgot to do them entirely, you will just see the server name. And when you click on the plus sign to expand it, nothing will happen. You won't see the project home underneath. All right, so what we can do now is just to verify everything is all well, we'll go ahead and try activating a project on that server. So since I left Project Explorer open on the server with the sample project active, that's why it's got a little red check mark, I'll try activating that same project. And so since we enabled concurrent access on the server, it should allow both of us to have the sample project active, which it does. So at this point, we verified we can see the server, we're activated a project server, and so we're complete. This workstation is able to see the server. So at this point, you would just go to the next workstation and perform the exact same configuration.